Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. This time we're diving into a topic suggested by you, our amazing listeners. It's something that's not talked about enough, especially when it comes to autism spectrum disorder. We're going deep into the world of, well, it's a bit of a mouthful, dermatophagia.
It is, and it's more common than many people think, especially within the autistic community. And you know what? The insights we're about to uncover are truly fascinating. And we're going to be using Cheap ABA's article, Understanding Dermatophagia, the Overlooked Connection in Autism.
Okay, so dermatophagia, for those hearing this word for the first time, like myself, break it down for us. What exactly are we talking about?
Well, put simply, dermatophagia is the biting, picking, or chewing of one's own skin. And I want to emphasize here, we're not just talking about occasionally biting your nails. This is different, it's compulsive, often categorized as a body-focused repetitive behavior, or we can call those BFRBs.
So it's not a matter of willpower, then, just breaking a bad habit. There's something deeper going on.
Exactly, you got it. It's more complex than that, and while you see it in a lot of people, it's way more common in those with autism, which of course is what we're focusing on. In fact, some research shows almost half of individuals with ASD might engage in some type of BFRB, with this being a very common one.
Wow, 50%. That's huge. Really highlights why understanding these behaviors is so crucial, especially when you mentioned they can become, not just a one-time thing.
Right, it's not just a fleeting thing. For a lot of people, it's a constant struggle that can last for years. And here's something interesting from the article. Dermatophagia is reported a lot more in females, specifically within the autistic population. Why that could be, well, that's a whole other layer to uncover.
Yeah, that's super fascinating. Makes you wonder about societal pressures and how women and girls, especially those on the spectrum, experience the world differently. But hold on, before we get ahead of ourselves, let's take a step back. What's going on beneath the surface? Like, what actually causes someone to engage in this kind of behavior?
The why is a great question to ask, but it's definitely complicated. Cheap ABA, our source here, points to several things that all kind of connect. One big one is sensory sensitivities. The way many with autism experience sensory input, the sights, the sounds, textures, it's very different. What might seem totally normal to us could be really intense or even painful for them.
So, are you saying that for someone dealing with these really heightened senses, dermatophagia could be a way for them to seek out a certain kind of sensory input, almost like some people find comfort in, like repetitive movements?
Exactly. Think about it like this. Biting or picking at your skin, it creates this consistent, predictable feeling, a tactile sensation that they might find actually soothing, even enjoyable in a way, which is hard for, us to really grasp.
Yeah, when you put it like that, it starts to make a lot more sense. It's about getting a sense of control, a way to self-regulate in a world that can be completely overwhelming.
It really is about finding that balance, right? And for some, that might mean these repetitive behaviors. But sensory stuff, it's just one piece of the puzzle, you know?
Mhm.
The article also talks about anxiety and stress, especially for people on the autism spectrum, how it plays a big role.
Well, yeah, it makes sense. Like, we all have our ways of dealing with stress, right? So for someone with ASD who's maybe already dealing with sensory overload or social anxieties, those urges to do things like dermatophagia, they could be amplified, right?
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. It's like a way to cope, to manage all those intense feelings. There's actually some interesting stuff happening in the brain too. Repetitive motions, like skin picking, can release endorphins. Those are the feel-good chemicals, right? Which makes them feel better temporarily.
So in a way, it's like they're self-medicating, but with a behavior that could have really negative consequences in the long run.
Yeah, and that's why getting to the bottom of these causes, the why behind it all, is so important to figuring out how to manage it properly. But it's not just about the senses or anxiety either. The article also mentions how important routine and repetition are for people with ASD, often providing comfort and predictability. A sense of control in a world that can feel chaotic.
That makes a lot of sense. We've talked before about how structure and routine can be grounding, especially for those on the spectrum. So in a way, could dermatophagia be a way for them to self-regulate within their routines, like create a sense of order?
You got it. That's exactly it. But we can't just ignore the fact that this behavior, while we're understanding the causes behind it, it's not harmless. There are other impacts. It's not just about the individual themselves.
Right, and we've talked about the physical risks like infections and scarring from the skin picking itself, but there's a whole other side, the emotional toll it takes, especially when you think about self-esteem and social interactions.
Yeah, those are some of the things people don't always think about. Imagine the constant worry about other people noticing marks on your skin. The fear of being judged or seen as different is tough.
It really is. It highlights just how important awareness and understanding are, not just within families, but in society as a whole. But let's switch gears for a bit, talk about what can be done to help, because while understanding the why is crucial, what can people actually do about it? And it looks like, thankfully, our source offers some helpful advice.
It does, and they really emphasize getting professional help, which makes sense. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Yeah.
Every individual with ASD is unique. So having a team of professionals, maybe a psychologist, therapist, even a dermatologist, can help pinpoint those individual triggers and develop a plan.
So it's about getting to the core of the behavior, not just the surface stuff. What might that kind of plan involve?
Well, it could involve a few different things. The source specifically mentions cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT for short, and habit reversal training. And they say these can be pretty effective for BFRBs like dermatophagia.
I've heard of those therapies, but how do they actually work in this context? Feels like retrain your brain would be really important here.
Yeah, you're right. It's all about rewiring those neural pathways. So with CBT, you're identifying and changing those negative thoughts and beliefs that are often kind of fueling these behaviors.
So instead of just saying, don't pick your skin, you're digging into the root of the issue, the why behind it all.
Exactly. It's about understanding the triggers. For example, if stress at school is a trigger for someone, CBT helps them recognize those feelings early on and develop healthier ways to cope. So instead of resorting to skin picking, maybe it's deep breathing exercises or listening to music, something calming in those moments of anxiety.
Makes sense. And what about habit reversal training? How does that work?
That one's more about the behavior itself, building self-awareness around the urge. So imagine someone realizing, okay, every time I get nervous during a test, I start picking.
Like an internal alarm bell going off, they catch themselves in the act.
Yes, exactly. And once they're aware of the pattern, they can start doing something else instead. Maybe it's having a fidget toy handy or practicing a specific hand gesture, anything to kind of break that automatic urge to pick.
It's amazing how these therapies offer such targeted solutions. But, our source also talked about creating a sensory-friendly environment. How does that help manage dermatophagia?
Think of it as setting the stage for success, right? If someone is sensitive to certain textures or things they see, minimizing those can be a game changer. Maybe it's soft, comfy clothing, weighted blankets, or just dimming those bright lights, just creating a calming space where they're less likely to feel overwhelmed and need to self-soothe.
So it's all about being proactive with those sensory experiences throughout the day. And I'm guessing this is another area where those fidget toys and things come in handy.
Absolutely. Having those other outlets for their sensory needs is so important.
Mhm.
Instead of picking at their skin, maybe they're squeezing a stress ball or playing with kinetic sand, even just having a piece of soft fabric to touch.
Yeah.
Anything that can give them that same sensory input, but in a healthy way.
Redirecting those impulses, yeah. And it's not just about the environment or fidgets either. I remember the source also brought up skincare, which seems a bit counterintuitive, right? Especially when we're talking about something that harms the skin.
You might seem that way, but it's actually huge, both physically and emotionally.
Hmm.
On the physical side, a good skincare routine can really help soothe and heal their skin, reducing the risk of infections from those sores. But the emotional impact, that's really interesting.
Because it's a way of taking care of yourself, even if you're struggling.
Yeah, exactly. It's like saying, hey, my body is worth taking care of, even with this going on. It can really shift how someone views their body in a more positive way.
That's really powerful. And, it made me think about another thing the article emphasized: open communication. People struggling with dermatophagia need to feel safe talking about it without feeling ashamed or judged.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, these behaviors, they're often kept secret, which just makes it so much harder to get help. That's why it's crucial to have that safe and supportive environment, whether it's with family, friends, or a therapist. Just letting them know they're not alone, their feelings are valid, and there are people who understand and want to help.
This deep dive has been truly eye-opening. We've learned so much about something that's often misunderstood and stigmatized.
It really shows how complex autism is. Dermatophagia, it's not just some weird thing, It's driven by sensory needs, anxiety, social dynamics, routine. It's all connected.
It all comes back to understanding the why behind the behavior, so we can approach it with compassion, empathy, and a genuine desire to help. And to our listener who suggested this topic, thank you for trusting us to explore this with you. We hope this has been insightful, maybe even empowering in some ways. Knowledge is power, and the more we understand these nuances of autism, the better we can support this incredible community.
Well said. And remember, There's hope, there's support, and there are effective ways to manage dermatophagia and live a full life.
We'll wrap up this episode of The Deep Dive here. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.